The morning sunlight poured into Derek Newton's office, casting long shadows across his meticulously arranged desk. At 45, his sharp features and salt-and-pepper hair radiated a calm authority. The walls behind him showcased a collection of awards and certificates, visual proof of a career built on turning impossible problems into resounding successes. Today was no different. The Harrison Bridge project, a financial black hole before Derek took over, was now a triumph of engineering efficiency. His redesign not only salvaged the project but saved the city millions while strengthening its structural integrity. "Mr. Newton?" Sarah, his ever-efficient assistant, peeked through the door. "The board meeting starts in 5 minutes." Derek nodded, gathering his presentation materials with the precision of a man who left nothing to chance. "Thanks, Sarah. Did finance send the updated projections?" "They just came in." "I've added them to your slides," she replied, handing him a sleek tablet. "And congratulations in advance, word is the promotion's already decided." He allowed himself a measured smile. "Let's not count our chickens just yet." In the boardroom, Derek delivered his findings with characteristic precision. Charts, projections, and redesigns were presented with a confidence honed over decades. The board members listened intently, nodding at his every point. When he finished, Chairman Phillips broke the silence. "Remarkable work, Derek. The board has unanimously decided to promote you to Senior Project Director. Effective immediately." A wave of applause filled the room. Derek shook hands, exchanged congratulations, and posed for a photo. Yet, even as he stood among his peers, his mind was already moving to the next challenge. Success wasn't a destination for Derek, it was a continuous journey. Later that evening, back in his office, Derek picked up the phone to call Amanda, his wife of 22 years. She answered on the third ring. "Derek, how did it go?" Amanda's voice carried its usual warmth, though there was an edge of distraction he hadn't noticed before. "Got the promotion," he said, letting a rare note of pride slip into his tone. "Thinking of celebrating tonight at l'Amazon." "Oh honey, I'm so sorry," Amanda replied quickly. "I have a client meeting that's running late." "Rain check?" Derek paused. In the background, he heard faint music and chatter, sounds distinctly out of place for Amanda's design studio. "Everything okay there?" "Sounds busy." "Oh, just at a cafe, going over some designs. Salvador is helping me with a new meditation room concept," she explained, her tone too casual. "You know how these creative meetings go." "Salvador Knox." The name pricked at Derek's memory. Amanda had mentioned the yoga instructor months ago, a new hire to help with her stress management. Derek had met him once, a man with teeth too white and a gaze that lingered too long on Amanda. "Of course," Derek said evenly. "Don't work too late." After hanging up, Derek opened their joint bank account. Another $5,000 withdrawal, labeled home renovation research. Curious wording for what should have been a straightforward design consultation. The drive home felt longer than usual, the city lights blurring as a throbbing migraine crept behind Derek's eyes. The house stood quiet, its modern architecture a testament to Amanda's refined aesthetic. Inside, family photos lined the walls, a visual archive of their life together, their wedding day, Emma's high school graduation, vacations that now felt distant and unreal. He walked into his home office and opened the drawer to retrieve his migraine medication. Then, from upstairs, Emma's voice drifted down. Clear. Unmistakable. "No, Mia. My dad still has no clue," Emma said, her tone almost conspiratorial. "Mom's boyfriend even picks me up from school sometimes when he's in town." Derek froze, his hand on the drawer handle. "Yeah, they're planning to move to California once Dad pays off my college," Emma continued, her voice tinged with excitement. "Mom says Salvador's got connections there." "I know, right? She says Dad's too boring. Too predictable. At least Salvador takes her dancing." The drawer closed quietly, the medication forgotten. Derek sat in the darkness, his engineering mind processing this new data. Amanda's absences. The financial discrepancies. Emma's sudden interest in California. The variables aligned with disturbing clarity. The next morning, Derek maintained his routine with the precision of a man who refused to let chaos dictate his actions. At breakfast, Amanda chatted about her latest project, her phone constantly in hand. Derek noticed how she angled the screen away from him and the small smile that played on her lips as she read her messages. "Greg called yesterday," Amanda said casually, referring to Derek's charming but unreliable brother. "The startup's doing well. That investment really helped him take off." Derek stirred his coffee. "Which investment was that?" "Oh, from those early investors," Amanda waved dismissively, already checking her phone again. "He's hosting another business meeting today." "Such a responsible brother you have." "Greg." "Amanda." "Salvador." The names clicked into place, forming a faint outline of a conspiracy. For the first time in years, Derek felt the unsettling twinge of being outmaneuvered. But as an engineer, Derek knew one thing better than most: every structure, no matter how solid it seemed, had its weak points. All it took was finding the right one to bring the whole thing down. Derek Newton's engineering instincts wouldn't allow him to ignore inconsistencies. His sharp mind, trained to identify structural weaknesses, began to analyze his personal life with the same precision he applied to his projects. That afternoon, Derek accessed their joint account history, scrutinizing every transaction over the past 6 months. Withdrawals labeled as home renovation, research, and college expenses totaled over $50,000. Amanda had been insistent that this money was for Emma's future, yet Stanford, Emma's initial choice, offered a scholarship that covered most of her tuition. These discrepancies planted seeds of doubt that sprouted rapidly. Still, Derek needed more than numbers to confirm his suspicions. He wasn't a man who acted on impulse. At work, he discreetly logged into the company's database of private investigation services. One name stood out: Rul Levy, a former military intelligence officer with a reputation for discretion and results. Derek drafted an email, concise and professional, requesting a consultation. By late afternoon, Derek sat across from Levy in a quiet corner of a coffee shop far from his usual haunts. Levy was a compact man with sharp, watchful eyes and an unflinching demeanor. "Tell me about Salvador Knox," Derek began, sliding a thick envelope of cash across the table. Levy took the envelope without a word, nodding once. "I'll have preliminary findings within 48 hours." True to his word, Levy's report arrived swiftly, and it painted a damning picture. Salvador Knox was no mere yoga instructor. His real estate license had been revoked in 3 states due to ethical violations. His pattern was consistent: identify wealthy, married women, gain their trust through wellness coaching, and then siphon their resources under the guise of personal or professional investment. "He's done this before," Levy said during their follow-up meeting, spreading photographs and documents across the table. 3 women. All wealthy. All married. 2 divorced their husbands and lost everything. The third, Levy hesitated. She took her own life when she discovered the extent of his manipulation. Derek's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He flipped through the pages of evidence, his sharp eyes catching every detail. The final piece was perhaps the most unsettling: Salvador's financial connections to Greg's startup. A significant $300,000 investment had been routed through a shell company, KNX Enterprises, which Levy traced back to Salvador. The amount matched several withdrawals from Derek and Amanda's joint account. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align. At home, Derek's observations grew more pointed. Amanda's absences were always explained with vague references to client meetings or book clubs. Yet these meetings rarely seemed to produce tangible results. One evening, he watched through his office window as Amanda left with Linda Carlson, the neighborhood social butterfly. Linda's car, Derek noted, returned far sooner than Amanda did. The following morning, he overheard Emma on the phone again. No, I don't think he suspects anything. Salvador says we'll move before Dad even notices the money's gone. Her words stung, but they also clarified her role. Whether knowingly or not, Emma had become a pawn in Amanda and Salvador's scheme. Derek's growing collection of evidence led him to a painful conclusion: this wasn't a series of coincidences. Amanda, his wife of over 2 decades, was systematically dismantling their life together. She wasn't alone. Greg, Salvador, and even the neighbors were complicit, their motivations varying from personal gain to covering their own secrets. It was a structure built on lies, but Derek knew one thing for certain: every structure, no matter how cleverly designed, had a critical failure point. The first crack in the facade came from Levy's deeper investigation. Salvador Knox is more than a fraud, Levy explained during their next meeting. He's a predator. He identifies his targets, exploits their vulnerabilities, and drains them dry before moving on. Your wife isn't just another victim, she's an accomplice. Levy laid out additional findings. Amanda had been funneling money through multiple shell companies connected to Salvador, some of which also tied back to Greg's startup. Their neighbors, the Carlsons and the Wilders, had accepted payments from Amanda under the guise of loans, ensuring their cooperation and silence. Emma, knowingly or not, had acted as a courier, delivering documents and running errands that facilitated the financial scheme. Levy's tone hardened. This is a network, Mr. Newton. Every player has a role, and your wife is at the center of it. Derek's methodical mind turned this web of betrayal into a blueprint. He identified each individual's weak point, isolating their motivations and how to leverage them. Amanda's vanity. Salvador's overconfidence. Greg's greed. The neighbor's secrets. Emma's misplaced loyalty. His plan began with the accounts. He arranged for their joint finances to be monitored closely while quietly transferring his personal assets to secure accounts. Amanda and Salvador wouldn't notice until it was too late. Next, he solidified Emma's education fund, locking it into an irrevocable trust. The money could only be accessed for educational expenses, ensuring she had a future, even if her current loyalties lay elsewhere. Derek's suspicions about Greg led him to confront his brother under the guise of casual family support. Greg, he said over lunch, Amanda mentioned your startup is doing well. I'd love to see how you've grown it. Greg's charm faltered momentarily, but he recovered with a practiced grin. Of course, bro. It's a team effort, you know. We've got some great investors. Derek filed the response away. Salvador's $300,000 investment wasn't just about siphoning funds, it was a foothold in Greg's operation. Derek suspected Salvador was laundering stolen money through the startup, masking it as legitimate revenue. That evening, Derek confronted Amanda, carefully choosing his words to avoid raising her defenses. Do you think Emma's ready for medical school out of state? He asked over dinner. Amanda barely looked up from her phone. She's always wanted to explore new places. California's a great opportunity. And Salvador? Does he have plans to move too? The question caught Amanda off guard, but she recovered quickly. What? Derek, that's a strange thing to ask. He's just helping with my projects. Derek smiled faintly. Of course. Just wondering how all the pieces fit together. Amanda's expression froze for a moment before she masked it with a laugh. You're always overthinking. Behind the scenes, Derek intensified his preparations. He began compiling documentation of every suspicious transaction, every connection between Amanda and Salvador, and every irregularity in Greg's startup. The evidence Levy provided was meticulously organized into binders, each labeled for easy access. He also started probing the neighbors indirectly. A passing comment to Tom Wilder about gambling debts confirmed his suspicions when Tom turned pale and quickly changed the subject. Linda Carlson's overly friendly demeanor belied the panic in her eyes when Derek casually mentioned Amanda's book club meetings. The night before his next move, Derek sat in his office, surrounded by documents that detailed the betrayal. He couldn't deny the pain of realizing the depth of Amanda's deceit. But as he stared at the evidence, the engineer in him took over. Every system has a weak point. Every structure can be dismantled. The pieces were falling into place. Tomorrow, he would begin his counterattack. Derek Newton's plan transitioned from observation to action. Each move was deliberate, targeting the structure of lies Amanda, Salvador, and Greg had built. Derek knew that success lay not in a single dramatic confrontation but in systematically dismantling their foundation. The first blow landed when Derek's attorney, Catherine Parsons, entered the picture. Renowned as the city's most ruthless divorce attorney, Parsons reviewed the evidence with a professional detachment that only heightened her intensity. "This is comprehensive," she said, flipping through documents Levy had gathered. "Your wife's been busy, hasn't she? And your brother, how charmingly reckless. Salvador Knox, though? He's the linchpin." "He's not the only one," Derek replied, gesturing to files on the Carlsons, Wilders, and even Judge Reynolds, Amanda's father. "I want them all accounted for." Parsons nodded. "We'll start with the finances. Freezing joint accounts and securing assets will send a clear message." "And Emma's trust?" Derek asked, his voice hardening. "It's locked down. Neither Amanda nor Salvador can touch it." Derek's second move came the following day. He scheduled an impromptu lunch with Greg at one of their old haunts. Greg, always eager to maintain the illusion of brotherly camaraderie, arrived with a flashy grin. "Bro, what's this about? Celebrating the promotion?" Derek leaned forward, his tone icy. "I know about KNX Enterprises." Greg froze, his grin faltering. "What are you talking about?" "The $300,000 investment. Salvador Knox. The shell companies. The fake consulting contracts. I know everything." Greg's face paled. "Derek, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," Derek cut him off. "You've been laundering money for Salvador and Amanda, using your startup as cover. You're complicit in their scheme." Greg's hands trembled. "You can't prove that." Derek smiled faintly. "Actually, I can. And so can the SEC. I've already prepared an anonymous tip with full documentation. Consider this your only warning: walk away, or I'll let them burn your startup to the ground." Back at home, Amanda's mask of nonchalance began to crack. She had noticed the joint accounts were inaccessible and cornered Derek in his home office. "Derek, I tried to make a withdrawal today. The accounts are frozen. What's going on?" "Bank error, I suppose," Derek replied smoothly, not looking up from his work. "I'll call them tomorrow." Amanda's frustration bubbled beneath her calm facade. "You're sure you didn't do something?" "Why would I? You're the one managing those funds, remember?" She hesitated, sensing the steel in Derek's tone. Without another word, she left the room, her footsteps sharp against the hardwood floor. Levy's investigation into Salvador uncovered even more damning evidence. Salvador had been involved in similar schemes in Arizona and Nevada, leaving a trail of financial devastation. Worse, his predatory behavior extended beyond finances. His manipulation had pushed at least one woman to suicide. Derek's anger, always tightly controlled, simmered as Levy presented this information. "He's a predator," Levy said, his tone even. "The kind who thinks he's untouchable. People like him always slip up when the pressure builds." "Good," Derek replied. "Let's see how he performs under stress." The first major crack in the conspiracy came from the Carlsons. Derek sent an anonymous letter to Linda Carlson's husband, detailing her affair with her tennis instructor and her involvement in Amanda's schemes. The fallout was immediate. Linda, desperate to protect her reputation, withdrew her cooperation with Amanda. Next, Derek turned his attention to Tom Wilder, whose gambling debts made him an easy target. An anonymous tip to his wife revealed not only his financial troubles but also his complicity in Amanda's alibis. The Wilders' marriage quickly deteriorated, leaving Tom too preoccupied to support Amanda. At work, Derek's professional life remained untouched. His role in the Harrison Bridge project was nearing completion, and his colleagues marveled at his focus. What they didn't know was that Derek's mind was constantly working on another project, the methodical destruction of his betrayers. Every evening, after Amanda left for her yoga sessions or book club meetings, Derek meticulously documented the next steps of his plan. His office became a war room, filled with binders, charts, and timelines detailing every move. The final piece fell into place when Greg attempted to transfer funds from the joint accounts, only to find them frozen. His panicked call came late at night. "Derek, we need to talk," Greg stammered. "Something's wrong with the accounts." "Indeed," Derek replied coldly. "I'll see you soon." The pressure was building, and Derek knew the collapse was imminent. His preparation was complete. All that remained was to apply the final force to bring the entire structure of betrayal crashing down. Derek Newton's meticulous planning reached its crescendo as the web of lies Amanda, Salvador, and Greg had woven began to unravel. With the groundwork in place, Derek moved decisively, triggering a cascade of events that none of them could escape. The first strike landed when Derek's attorney, Catherine Parsons, filed divorce papers. Alongside the papers, Amanda received an extensive dossier of evidence, financial records showing her embezzlement, photographs of her meetings with Salvador, and correspondence proving her complicity in money laundering. Amanda confronted Derek that evening, her carefully maintained composure shattered. "What is this?" she demanded, slamming the documents onto his desk. "You're accusing me of fraud? Conspiracy?" "I'm not accusing you, Amanda," Derek replied, his voice cold and controlled. "I'm documenting the truth." "You've been spying on me," she hissed, her eyes blazing. "Call it due diligence," Derek said, rising from his chair. "An engineer doesn't start dismantling a structure without understanding its weak points." Amanda's fury flickered into desperation. "Derek, please. We can fix this. For Emma's sake." Derek's gaze hardened. "For Emma's sake, I've already secured her future. You, on the other hand, have no one to blame but yourself." The second blow came through Greg's startup. Derek's anonymous tip to the SEC included detailed evidence of financial irregularities, fake consulting contracts, and ties to Salvador's shell companies. Federal agents raided the office, seizing documents and freezing assets. Greg's panicked calls to Derek were met with icy silence. When they finally met face-to-face, Greg was a shadow of his usual confident self. "Derek, I swear I didn't know Salvador was a con artist," Greg pleaded. "Amanda said it was just a family investment." "You knew enough to cover for them," Derek said, his tone devoid of sympathy. "Now you'll face the consequences." Meanwhile, Salvador's facade as a spiritual guide and yoga instructor crumbled under the weight of Levy's investigation. The revelations of his fraudulent past and manipulative tactics reached the police, prompting an investigation into his financial dealings. Salvador, desperate to escape legal repercussions, attempted to confront Derek directly. Late one night, Salvador appeared uninvited at Derek's home, his charm replaced by barely controlled anger. "Listen, man," Salvador began, his voice low. "You don't want to do this. Think about your reputation. Your family." Derek didn't flinch. Interesting coming from someone who's destroyed 3 families already. "Tell me, Salvador, does Amanda know about your other victims?" Salvador's confident mask cracked. "This doesn't have to get messy." "It already is," Derek replied, stepping closer. "You have 24 hours to return every cent you stole. If you don't, I'll personally ensure the FBI has everything they need to put you away for decades." Salvador's smirk faltered. He left without another word. The neighborhood began to implode as Derek's anonymous letters exposed the roles of the Carlsons and the Wilders in Amanda's schemes. Linda Carlson's husband threw her out after learning about her affair, while Tom Wilder's wife initiated divorce proceedings, armed with proof of his gambling debts and duplicity. Amanda found herself increasingly isolated. Her once loyal allies turned their backs, each consumed by their own unraveling lives. Derek's confrontation with Emma was the hardest blow to deliver. She stormed into his office after school, her face flushed with anger. "Mom told me everything," she said, her voice trembling. "You're trying to ruin her because you're jealous of Salvador." Derek stayed seated, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Sit down, Emma." "I'm not a child," she snapped. "No," Derek said evenly. "You're not. Which is why you'll read this." He handed her a file containing bank statements, transfer records, and surveillance photos. Emma hesitated, then began flipping through the pages. Her face paled as the truth unfolded before her. "They used me," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "They used all of us," Derek said, his voice firm. "And now, they'll face the consequences." The final strike came with the divorce proceedings. Catherine Parsons delivered an airtight case, leveraging Amanda's fraud and financial misconduct to secure the majority of the couple's remaining assets for Derek. Salvador's mounting legal troubles ensured his role in the scheme would bring further scrutiny. As the evidence of Amanda's betrayal was laid bare in court, her confidence crumbled. Judge Reynolds, her father, attempted to intervene but quickly withdrew when his own shady dealings were exposed, thanks to Derek's carefully timed tip to federal investigators. By the end of the week, the scheme had collapsed completely. Amanda's accounts were frozen, Salvador was under investigation, Greg's startup was effectively dismantled, and the neighborhood conspirators were left to face the fallout of their exposed secrets. Derek, ever the engineer, had calculated every move with surgical precision. The structure of lies had been demolished, and he had ensured the debris wouldn't touch him or his future. With the betrayal fully dismantled and justice set in motion, Derek Newton turned his focus to rebuilding his life. For a man who thrived on solving problems, this was not just a closure but a new beginning. The divorce was finalized with Amanda receiving little more than the fallout of her actions. She moved into a modest apartment, her dreams of a Malibu life shattered. Salvador faced mounting charges, with new victims coming forward daily. Greg's startup was gone, his assets seized, and his reputation irreparably damaged. The Carlsons and Wilders became pariahs in the neighborhood, their complicity now common knowledge. Derek, however, emerged unscathed and stronger than ever. A week after the final court hearing, Derek walked into his company's headquarters and submitted his resignation. "You're leaving?" his boss asked, visibly stunned. But the Harrison Bridge project was a masterpiece. "It's completed, documented, and ready for handover," Derek replied. "It's time for me to start something new." His next move was already in motion. A prestigious engineering firm in Seattle had offered him a senior leadership role, drawn by his reputation for solving impossible challenges. The new position promised not just professional growth, but a complete change of scenery. In Seattle, Derek settled into a sleek, modern apartment overlooking the city skyline. The space was minimalist and functional, a reflection of his focus on the future. The penthouse windows offered a view of the bustling city below, each light a reminder of the possibilities ahead. Derek threw himself into his work, spearheading projects that challenged his skills and redefined his limits. His first major success in Seattle, a waterfront redevelopment, earned him industry accolades and cemented his reputation as one of the top engineers in the country. Emma's graduation from medical school was the only tie Derek allowed to his past. The irrevocable trust he had established ensured her education was secure, despite Amanda and Salvador's attempts to siphon the funds. Emma sent monthly emails, updating him on her residency and expressing remorse for her role in the betrayal. "Dear Dad, I graduated medical school last month," one email read. "I've started my residency at Mayo Clinic. Every day, I remember the lessons you taught me, about integrity, about consequences. I understand now why you made the decisions you did. I hope one day we can talk." Derek archived her messages without responding. The trust fund had done its job, her future was secure. But trust, once broken, wasn't so easily restored. Amanda attempted to reach out multiple times, her messages growing increasingly desperate as her life unraveled. Derek's lawyers handled her communications, ensuring he was shielded from her pleas. Meanwhile, Salvador's trial ended with a conviction, sentencing him to 20 years in prison. The predator who once thrived on others' trust had been caged, thanks to Derek's meticulous efforts. One evening, as Derek stood by the windows of his apartment, a glass of wine in hand, he reflected on the events that had brought him here. The dismantling of the betrayal had been methodical, precise, and unrelenting, a testament to his skills as an engineer. Some might have sought reconciliation, but Derek understood the truth: some structures couldn't be repaired. Sometimes, demolition was the only way forward. In time, Derek's life in Seattle became one of new projects and fresh opportunities. He forged connections with like-minded professionals, enjoying the respect and admiration he had earned. The wounds of betrayal faded, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing he had rebuilt his life on his terms. Derek Newton, the man who could solve any structural problem, had turned his greatest personal challenge into his most profound triumph.